Hi pals! Inspired by my recent... Is June recent? Recent-ish reupholstery project, I wanted to look into the history of the damask fabric that I used for it. Now, I didn't use a true damask, it was a cotton print, but still, prints are just a more recent chapter of this fabric's history. Before diving in, quick note on dates. As with a lot of things to do with widespread shifts and stuff, dates aren't always easy to pin down, so when I saw a random year really far back, like in the BCE era, like just generalized, I interpreted it to mean that it was sometime within the century, and so unless I say something like, it was specifically this year, that's how I'm meaning it. The further back in time we go, changes in technology just weren't recorded in a lot of societies. And as for carbon dating and such, artifact dating is good, but not so good as to be able to give a specific year in the BCE span. It's always a range unless the crafter or inventory person's records were found and a specific date was written there. Or we know that this is the work of so-and-so and they were alive from 60 to 10 BCE, which then helps us narrow it down more. So that's where I'm coming from with those early dates. Later dates, we actually know what was what. And so, if I say it was that year, then it was that year. But if it's, in the BCE era, unless I say that's what I'm going with.
And so, without further gilding the lily, and with no more ado, I give to you
Abridged version of the history of damask fabric. Damask is a thick, durable fabric made from a satin weave where there is a single warp thread and a single weft thread throughout, which gives the design a nice sheen on the matte background. It's now classified by some as a Jacquard fabric. Jacquard fabrics are mainly damasks and brocades, and there are important differences to these two fabrics that you need to keep in mind if you're looking to purchase either. Number 1. Brocades have embossed or raised patterns, where damasks are a flatter fabric generally. Number 2. Damasks are commonly monochromatic, but do have some multicolored designs to a limit. Brocades rarely only ever have one color to them. Number 3. Both have shine to them, but they achieve them differently. Brocades typically use metallic threads, and damasks, while some may have metallic threads in them, rely on the weave itself to make them shine. Number 4. I think this is the most important one, and it is the fastest way of telling them apart. Look at both sides of the fabric. Damasks, outside of prints like the one I used for my couch, are reversible. Brocades? Well, they're gorgeous from the front, but they're a hot mess from the back. Hey, editing me here to add something in, because I showed you more of what a damask is going to look like, and I also wanted to show you a bit more what a brocade would look like. But, thought I had a brocade in my stash. No, it's not a good proper brocade to illustrate just what I mean. So, even though it's technically not brocade, what I'm going to show you, it's more akin to what that is. Okay, so one sec. Just gonna switch it up here. Okay, so here is a cross stitch that I was working on forever ago. I screwed up somewhere. My tia gave it to me. She wanted me to do it. And I screwed up somewhere, and I have no idea where I screwed up, so I kind of put it away. But yeah, so as you can see, the design is coming along, you can tell it's Jeebus, and so you can tell that it's a person and whatnot. Okay. It's going to work out to be a nice picture from the front when I have undone it and then redo it. But then from the back, bam! Hot fucking mess. Like, when you look at the front, all the colors and whatnot, and it's a shading, and at the back it's all whoosh right across. So yeah, that's kind of more what a brocade is gonna look like for the most part.
rather than it being reversible, because this is very obviously not reversible. You cannot tell, really, like when it's done, it's harder to tell what the design is supposed to be. So yeah, that again, that's more what a brocade is gonna look like. Yeah. I was gonna say something and then my brain just went, oh, so, and technically on a Jacquard loom, which you'll see about later, technically, from what I was reading, there's also another type of, like, there were different names given for certain things, but one thing I found was also another type that was just kind of more of like a Jacquard weave rather than specifically Damask, which is a Jacquard fabric nowadays, or a brocade, which is nowadays again a Jacquard fabric. So, and the what I could tell, what people just generically call Jacquard, or at least seem to generically call Jacquard, it's not reversible, but it's not quite the hot mess. So yeah, there's also that. Although technically, like what I've seen, you could technically, if you wanted to be a little adventurous, use the wrong side of the fabric on a more, not Damask, not brocade, but just Jacquard in the middle there, if you really wanted to. But yeah, anyways, that's really the best way I had to show you what brocade was, because none of the friggin' fabric stores had anything. At least that were open when I was looking at stuff. And the internet failed me for good pictures of the back. They all just wanted to show the pretty front. I'm just like, seriously? So yeah. We're gonna go back to video me now, I think. Yeah, okay. See you then.
Because of their tweet.
Nice.
Because of their tight weave, true damasks lend themselves nicely to upholstery and for garments where you want a bit more structure for your silhouette. They're also used for table linens now and accessories like bags. Damasks are incorporated when modern fashion houses want to have a more expensive look to their garments, or by TV and movie costume designers when they're showing somebody that may not be poor, even when it doesn't make sense to their region, period, or class. Once prints come onto the scene, designs are also used for things like wallpaper. And now, I knew that this luxurious fabric was a thing for some fancy pants rich folk of parts of medieval Europe, but what I didn't know is that it originated in China as far back as 300 BCE, so way older than I ever thought. It was first hand woven, but by the Tang Dynasty they were using draw looms. It can be made from various fibers, such as wool or cotton, and more recently, of course, things like rayon. But when it was first made, it was done with silk. So it was very, very expensive. This did not stop the Greeks and Romans getting them and then unraveling bolts of silk when they came in, only to reweave the silk fibers with wool and cotton, making it slightly more accessible to people. You'd still have to be a patrician, but it wouldn't just be the richest of the rich that could get their hands on it. Although I don't know if they did this with the damask weave specifically, they did do it with general silks that came out of China. But because of the prohibitive cost in the early days, damasks and other silks weren't common outside of China. I doubt that it was all that common in China either, because again, silk. Hand-woven silk for a good chunk of time at that. Expensive. Very, very expensive. The weaving of the fabrics typically fell to the women of the family. This was something common throughout the ancient world, even in richer families. But the really cool thing that I learned about the earlier patterns, each woman had her own pattern that she wove, and as well as the use of colors that were specific to her. These patterns, as well as the color dyeing secrets, were passed down through the generations in each family. So by the time of the Tang Dynasty, some of the base patterns could have been as much as 900 or 1,000 years old. Like, that is crazy and amazing. I love it. Now, at some point, the skill set spread out from China into the Byzantine Empire and what we would now call the Middle East. So during the medieval period, this was another major area of production. Now, based off of what you see on TV and in movies, you might think that the desire, the love for damask has been constant throughout all of the Middle Ages. And if you thought that, you'd be wrong. Because the Europeans' want and love for this fabric has kind of ebbed and flowed and whatnot throughout the Middle Ages. During the Merovingian dynasty, this fabric was known of, and it existed, but it wasn't that accessible, right? Like, it still hadn't reached that point of it was accessible to more people. So it was probably more so traded between rulers of various areas as diplomatic gifts to decorate their homes, sometimes maybe to wear, but it was mostly used as decoration at that point. Unless, of course, you were the church, because they were also gifts to the church for both the ecclesiastical peoples to wear them and as decoration throughout. Because, those priests and bishops, they were preaching piety and restraint, while then their higher-ups were wearing fancy, expensive clothes, and they were all blinged up, they practice what I preach, but not what I do. Typical. But during the 9th and about until the 14th century, it seems its popularity then wanes, at least throughout some of Europe, for reasons I do not know. I assume it was because of the cost of the fabric, but This did not seem to be the case in Spain, though. They were the exception to the rule. It didn't seem to dissipate there, and it makes sense, since during that time it was ruled by those of the Muslim faith, and they always had direct links to various artisans and ports in the Islamic world, regardless of what was happening, and I assume that they were able to get it easier than most, even when factoring the long and literal shipping times. However, the design never completely died in the wider regions of Europe, and with so many armies going to and from the Middle East for various crusades of the 12th and 13th centuries, interest for many things from that part of the world increased in European communities. I would assume that this would account for why it slowly became more and more popular again by the time we reached the 14th century. According to one source I came across, during this time, some of the Crusaders kidnapped some Greek weavers and put them to work in their colonies, bringing their technological know-how, including how to make damask fabric, to Sicily. Now, I don't know where they got this specific info from. It was a secondary, probably tertiary source, and the article was on a fashion site about fabric, and unsurprisingly, it didn't have a bibliography. So I don't know where they got the story from. However, knowing what I know about that period of history, it wouldn't surprise me if this were a common thing in the Norman family. Battle of Hastings, French guys, William the Conqueror, a.k.a. the Bastard, a.k.a. William the First of England, and subsequent generations of that family, they had territory within Sicily during the Crusades. So again, wouldn't surprise me. But it is an uncorroborated story from what I've seen.
But it does add some color to the overall story.
By the time we reach the mid-14th century, we are finally seeing a new term crop up in French records. Damask. And no, it wasn't because they were going to a masked ball and upon arrival they were like, Merde, I forgot Damask. No. I don't even know if that was a thing in medieval times. Note to self, look up the history of masked balls later. Anyway. No. It was because they had this lovely, luxurious silk fabric in their inventories. And common theory on the name is that they mostly got it shipped from the ports and weavers of Damascus, which was kind of a port hub on the Silk Road, so they named it for where they got it from. For a long time, people thought that it was because it originated there, but as we now know, it didn't. I haven't seen any other theories of the European naming process, and there is some logic to it, so I'm liking that one. Eventually, Italy had dibs on the title of being a big hub of European production of damask on their own draw looms. However, as they were able to make it cheaper, it became more and more accessible to people, and sumptuary laws regarding what colors you were allowed to wear were put into place in Italy about the wearing of silks. This way, those pesky nouveau riches wouldn't be confused with the best of society, the nobility and ruling class. This wasn't the first time rules about wearing silk came about. In Christian Rome, it was thought that silk was only fit for women, and if you were a man and you wore it, you were debasing yourself for fashion. I could just see it now. Some aggrieved mother. Oh, the horror! Amandus is wearing silk. No, he should leave that for his wife. What is he doing? Anyway, time marched on. Love for it didn't fade again for a very long time. The Industrial Revolution eventually hit, and this is when one Joseph Marie Charles de Jacquard invented the Jacquard Loom in 1801. One source did say it could have been 1804, but since that was literally the only time I saw that mentioned, I'm sticking with 1801. We're gonna kick off the 19th century with style. This is why damask was classified as a jacquard fabric. With his new loom, he was able to mechanize the weaving process, making production even faster, and the fabric cheaper to create, even if the base mechanics of the loom were still hand-operated. Now, I would like to note here that while the 1820s to 60s brought the jacquard loom to be #1 ranked loom to use, the draw looms from Italy were still used in Europe as of the 1920s, and even as recently as the knots in France, Italy, and Spain. We'll get into why I think that's the case in a little bit, but for now, this new technology of the 19th century made it even more accessible to people, so now even the middle classes were able to get their grubby little paws on it. But no sumptuary laws that I'm aware of were made to restrict its use, but, it wasn't all
sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows.
The mass-produced nature of the fabric led to a decline in quality that people just didn't like, and it ebbed out of popular fashion again. Kinda wish that thought process was a thing now, but alas and alack, people love cheap quality clothes. But this did not last for long! The arts and craft movement revved up the desire to own damask again. So I barely scratched the surface on the arts and craft movement, and I am well on my way to having enough info to probably do a video on that alone if I wanted to, but we're just gonna take a quick look at it here. ANC started in the Brit Isles and then expanded throughout the world to varying degrees. It was a reaction to the perceived poor quality of life and working conditions that had befallen many artisans and craftspeople. It was mainly anti-industrial at its core, valuing the work and care that went into handcrafted items. In the UK, it was also heavily linked to socialist movements. One of the most well-known people of the movement, William Morris, was a socialist of the day, and he influenced this heavily, even though not all of the people involved were socialist, or even for some reason not anti-machine. On the European continent, it was associated with the preservation of national traditions in any type of thing where it can be handmade. In the US, they liked the visuals, but the socialist aspect was mostly ignored. Big surprise there. According to the Met, yes, that Met, there were a few what they called utopian communities where this was a factor, but for the most part, it wasn't a thing there. Didn't really show up in Canada much outside of interior design, but good old Willie Morris, he did influence what was seen here. And of course you can see the influence of ANC in Japan with the Mingei movement, I hope I pronounced that right, that cropped up in the 1920s. Regardless of how it manifested throughout the world, it was linked to the idealization of the simple life. Medieval life, or rather like with many movements idealizing various periods of the past, the nice parts of medieval life, the pretty parts, it was used as inspiration. Hence, and we come back to the main topic at hand, the resurgence of damask fabric being popular. However, it wasn't just seen in fabrics. You could now get wallpaper prints of the designs. But these were not true damasks. They were simply prints. True damasks are the woven fabric, and I mean, as nice as it is, could you imagine putting that thick, heavy fabric on the wall? I mean, that'd just be awkward as fuck. I'm glad the prints do exist, though, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to include it on my couch. The whole ANC movement and random other things that have been cropping up consistently since, like, you know, recently cottagecore, bardcore, witchcore, history bounding, all that, they pull on these visual motifs. That's 100% why I think that some places still have the older style looms and just don't want to move away from them. And I don't think they should stop. They should keep it on, right? Like, knowing how to work them is valuable knowledge. Although, going back a second, history bounding can be a much larger beast than just going with the pretty visuals, depending on who you talk to. So, as we move into the modern era, most Jacquard looms are no longer run by the punch card technology that existed when they were invented, but they are now computerized. But back to my couch. I learned through my reading that the bulk of common historical patterns that we know and love today, like what I have on my furniture, are not the medieval designs. I was so excited to have medieval elements in my designs, but it turns out that the scroll and acanthus leaf designs, they're more of a Renaissance thing. And by no means am I saying that that's bad. I still think it looks great and it's beautiful. I'm just sad because it's a little later than what I wanted it to be from. The earliest designs of the medieval world were commonly flowers, fruit, and animals. They also did hunting motifs, the occasional monogram, and even completed scenes of various events. As I said, during the Renaissance, designs shifted to what we most commonly think of when we think of damask weaves. And nowadays, newer types of patterns have come out, such as Rorschach blots, skulls. There's one design called Timorous Beasties, or is that the design house? I can't remember now. But one thing that they all have in common, all of these damask designs, is the symmetry. So that is why Rorschach works pretty well for it, even though it's a little weird. I mean, could you imagine going to somebody's house and they had, like, Rorschach damask style wallpaper, and you're just like, oh, I feel like I'm in a shrink's office. That's not what I wanted when I came to a friend's house. Although if you are a shrink, that would probably be a fun wallpaper for you. See what your patients come up with when they see it. Anyway. And so we end up here in 2023 with damasks as they are now. I'm sure that there is a lot I didn't touch on with the history of damask, but this is an abridged history. So, you know, there is that. So, I said in the main video that I'm not going to have anything again until March. And that's 100% true for that side of things. But depending on how things go, I may or may not have a video for you here on the member side of February. I don't know yet. I'm not sure, so we'll just have to wait and see, you know. But until then, regardless of when then is, blessed be. Sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. We're together. But this did not last for long. The arts and crafts movement revved up the Seriously? Screw you, phone. It's probably a game telling me, oh yes, your lives are recharged. Fuck you, I don't care right now. As we move into the modern era, and scene.